Welcome, everybody joining us. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar today. I'm just going to take a couple minutes to let everybody settle in before we get started. And just a couple of pointers before we do. Off to the side in the chat section, if you have any questions for today's guest speakers, leave them in the chat section. We will monitor those questions and bring them up in the Q&A portion of the webinar. Also, if you have any questions or feedback for the Chamber in general, send them to info@windsoressex-chamber.org. That's also in the chat section on the side. If you have any questions in regards to anything, we'll make sure that it gets to the right authority. And we also update our social media accounts as well as our website daily. And I've posted the handles for all of our platforms there in the chat, as well as the next two webinars that we have coming up. And today's webinar will be featuring Allison Hawkins, co-founder of Hawkins Co Accounting, and Nancy Jammu-Taylor, partner at McTague Law Firm. Just a couple more seconds and then I will pass it on to our President and CEO, Rakesh Naidu. Okay. I think we can get started. So I will now give the floor to Rakesh Naidu, the Chamber President and CEO, to introduce our guest speakers.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. For those of you who've been with us this week and the last week on our webinar series, you know the topics we've been covering, topics that are important to the business community, that are relevant to you, your employees. So we've been bringing our guests and offering some topics that would benefit you. For those of you who are coming and joining us for the first time, this is the webinar series where we bring in guest speakers who are experts in the domain. We've brought in elected officials, MPs, mayors, wardens, OCC president, and we'll be bringing more people and experts that you can benefit from hearing firsthand, so that the information that you need comes to you fast and is accurate, and you are up to date in terms of what's happening. As you know, a lot is happening. Change is happening by the hour, and every level of government is working on dealing with this. We here locally, you've seen City of Windsor take several measures to deal with the situation. Same as province. Announcement this afternoon about schools reopening being delayed to early May, and all the other things that the province has brought forward in terms of support to individuals, entrepreneurs, business owners through tax deferrals, exemption in employee health tax, or increasing the exemption levels, property tax deferrals, and so on. Same is with the federal government. They are working tirelessly to provide us with the support that is needed. They have listened to the business community. The Chamber here, along with many more in this community and outside, and the different networks, business networks, have been championing the cause of business and providing the government with information and feedback that they need to have to make very informed decisions on what support and measures needs to be taken to help the business community, whether that is access to cash flow, or whether it is helping entrepreneurs, keep their operations running, or whether it is help to employees, or whether it is those that are self-employed, or whether it is just being able to manage the operations by reducing the overheads, by either deferring taxes and import duties and so on. So several measures have been announced and have been well received. But as you can understand, it's a very challenging time because the information is coming thick and fast, and at times the information, the details of the information isn't there as much. So it has created some confusion. It is also, a lot of questions are being asked. What information has been shared by the government, and we get a lot of phone calls, emails from our members, from you, asking for information and clarification on what has been announced. So today we thought that we will bring our experts here who can talk to you and provide you a lot of information which would be of interest to you. We have with us, we've got Nancy Jammu-Taylor, who's with McTague Law Firm. So she's going to cover a lot of topics which relates to, if you've laid off employees, what's the thing that you need to take care of in terms of employee records, record of employment, the do's and don'ts, how do you communicate that? And then if there is, any further communication that you need to do with the employees, or, what is the record keeping of the documents that is required and so on. There's also questions on what is considered to be essential services and what is not essential services. A lot of companies have called us, asked for, well, we do such, such and such thing. Are we considered as essential service or not? And not every scenario has been properly understood by the government. In the supply chain. There are a lot of nuances, and this is something which we can provide some more information on. So Nancy will be talking about that, talking about how do you deal with layoffs and so on. So there's all these questions related to labor workforce that has come up in the last few days, for which you need information. She'll be covering those topics. Feel free to ask her further information on the chat box as well. And once Nancy has covered through her topic, her presentation, then we'll invite Allison Hawkins, who's the co-founder of Hawkins Accounting Firm, and she will also talk about EI, and then she will talk about the new program that's been announced, the wage subsidy, the 75% wage subsidy. The EI program, what the CERB, which is the Canada Emergency Response Benefit Program, and then also access to capital. How do you go about it? And then DDC has announced that they'll be offering cash. There's a lot of information there in terms of access to cash, in terms of getting more information in terms of wage subsidy, who qualifies, how do you apply, and all that. So they'll be sharing some very relevant information. I have to say this, that we don't necessarily have all the information. Nobody has all the information because the government has not yet announced it. But to the extent possible, to the best of our abilities, our experts are going to share with you what they know, what's the latest and the greatest, and the most updated information. So hopefully this will help you. And again, feel free to ask us questions on the chat box. So with that, I would like to invite Nancy. Nancy, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rakesh. And I must say, probably the one very key point, you said a lot of very important things, but one very key point is this is an ever-evolving situation. We are seeing situations where the government officials, whether it's the Premier or the Prime Minister, are standing before the country and announcing certain measures. I am instantly getting emails from clients going, does this apply to us? Can we have this? How does this work? And my answer to everybody is I have to see what the legislation looks like, because we've seen on a few occasions where something was announced and didn't come to fruition. And you'll hear a little bit later the 10% wage subsidy versus the 75% wage subsidy. There is no 10% wage subsidy anymore. So I know clients that are dealing with me more regularly are hearing me say, this is my advice to you today at this exact moment in time, because for a while there, it almost seemed that things were changing by the hour. So what Allison and I are going to try and do is, our very best at is try and speak to you about what we know as of today. We may throw some concepts out that we aren't completely sure about, because until we see the actual legislation that's passed, we don't know. And as you're all aware, we are getting daily updates from our government officials. So to start with, I'm having clients ask what types of information they should be sharing with their employees. What should communication look like? And if there's anything I am trying to do right now is I'm trying to stay very calm, and I'm trying to be very honest with all employees that I have to deal with. So whether that's internally at the McTague Law Firm or what I'm advising my HR professionals to do. And I think the one thing we all have to remember right now is this too shall pass. This is a moment in time, and we are all being inundated right now with information. I think I've forced myself over the weekend to shut down social media because I was finding it very negative and very overwhelming. And I think it's really important that we're relying on factual information and that we're communicating that to our employees. So you're going to have employees that walk in your office, you probably already have, that have a number of questions, and you might not always have the answer. And that's okay to say, look, I don't know that right now, but I'm looking into it. Reinforce your commitment to your employees. Reinforce that you're going to get through this. Reinforce that you are doing everything you can to maintain your economic viability out there. You're maintaining your supply chains, you're maintaining whatever is necessary to ensure that when this is all over, they will have a place to come back to. And most employees I have found to be quite understanding when their employers are speaking with them. I think, if anything, the range of responses have gone from, thank you so much for caring. I was panicked out of my mind, and I appreciate that you provided me with some comfort in that. And I think more than anything else, because you're their economic source of stability, knowing that you're there and you're doing what you can to keep the business going, and you are reinforcing the commitment you have to bring them back to work when this is all over is also helpful. And I can tell you, there have been some really feel-good stories. We have clients that have reached out that have said, I want to be able to reward my employees down the road when I have more profits available to me to share with them. Can we look at something like that? Can I tell them that's something we want to do? Yes, if that is something you're open to doing, whereby you want to make it right down the road when you might be in a financial position to do so, of course, bonus systems and programs are available, and we've assisted many clients in putting those together. We have some employers that have decided to do wage advances with their employees and work in those ways. So I think it's really important to maintain positivity, to stay calm, and to communicate openly with your employees. So I know there are quite a few employers that are still up and running. I think after the government sent out the list of 70 some odd essential services, because on the Tuesday, I think the Monday the phone calls were probably going to be shut down, and then Tuesday was, oh my goodness, do we get to stay open? And our perspective here at McTague Law Firm has been, if you are part of that supply chain and you provide a service that falls within the scope of that list, continue providing it. What I took from that message from the Premier was, look, we have to balance our health considerations with our economic considerations. And when we come through this, because we will come through this, we need to have companies that are able to employ our individuals. Now, obviously, we have ones that were clearly closed down. We have, the restaurant business from a dine-in perspective has been impacted. Any sort of personal care, whether it's hair salons, nail salons, all those kinds of things have all been impacted. Recreational activities of all sorts have been impacted, including fitness and centers and whatnot. But aside from that, if you are part of a chain, and even if you're the person who just starts the process, you're creating the product that leads to the next stage, which heads up to the next stage and gets us to a final end product, and it's all covered by this, keep working. I know we've had some clients reach out that provide certain equipment such as cabinets, let's say, to residential homes. Well, construction is continuing in the residential and the commercial sector, so to the extent that you provide a product in that regard, you're part of that supply chain and you need to keep operating. Now, what does that mean? When you're operating, you still have to bear in mind all of the guidelines we're getting from the health unit. So I think it's very, very important that you are ensuring that those guidelines are more directives that you're following in the workplace. So you should not be having employees or visitors attending your work site that have been out of the country in the last 14 days. We have some clients that have actually been more restrictive in that regard and are actually looking at any travel outside of the area, because there have been more cases, for example, in Toronto and other more metropolitan areas. We leave that to clients to defer to their kind of comfort level, depending on the circumstances. But you want to make sure no one's coming in that regard. I am recommending that employers, to the extent they're operating, have controlled measures in terms of their access to the building in general. We're really encouraging people to limit any in-person meetings. As you can see with us doing this webinar by Zoom, video conferencing abilities are quite extensive and quite helpful and allow you to still conduct those meetings that need to be conducted. So where video and teleconferencing is available, we strongly encourage that. As well, when you're talking about the methods you're employing within your organization, I can tell you we have a rule here at McTague Law Firm, and we are down to a skeleton crew now because we heard the Prime Minister say, try to have people work from home wherever possible. We've done that. We've encouraged people to work from home wherever that's possible. The ones who have to be on site to ensure the firm keeps operating, they come in the building. The first thing they do is they wash their hands. And we put in the bathroom the health unit's guidelines on how to do proper hand washing. We have notices around the building that say, bear in mind, if you're coughing or sneezing, do it into your elbow. And we are all maintaining a 2-meter distance, actually much more than that here in the firm. The lawyers, when they're in, are in their own individual offices. You can probably see mine right now. There's no one around me. And we've ensured that no two staff are in the same office together. They are all spread out. I think we have probably many feet between our employees, and we're encouraging that also. We also will not allow anybody to come in here if they're not feeling well. Well, what's been interesting as we learn more about COVID is having a fever is not a determinative factor. So we are asking our employees to advise if they have any sort of symptoms of being ill, and in that regard to not attend the workplace. We're also being sensitive and encouraging our clients to be sensitive to anybody who has any sort of vulnerability, be it any sort of respiratory condition or whatnot. And we don't want anyone with any of those conditions coming into our workplace either. So please make sure you're taking that into account. And then in terms of the people you have on site, don't share anything. It's important not to be sharing pens. If you have to make a phone call, use your phone. Don't use someone else's phone. We really need to do our part to ensure that any amount of contact with one another is kept to a minimum. I recognize there might be shared spaces. Back when we were at a larger complement here at the firm, we had said to people, please don't eat in the lunchroom, because then we were getting 10, 15 people together in a small area. We said, look, eat at your desks, because we still had that space there. So it really does require that even though you are an essential service, you are following all of these guidelines and ensuring that you're keeping your staff separated. Social distancing really is the key here. So there's been a lot of confusion regarding the recently announced CERB benefit, the emergency, the latest one, the $2,000 a month one. And we've had clients still continuing to ask, okay, what if I still have to lay off my employees due to a shortage of work? So one thing I want to highlight, the new CERB portal is not up and running as of yet. So at this point in time, we are still advising our clients where you have a shortage of work and you are unable to allow your employees to continue working, do issue an ROE, a record of employment. Most of our non-union employers do not have employment contracts in place that provide for temporary layoffs. And why I bring that up is because if you don't have it in your employment contracts, you do put yourself at risk of a constructive dismissal claim. And what a constructive dismissal claim is it's an alteration of a fundamental term or condition of employment. So absent a term or condition that says you have the right to lay me off in cases such as a shortage of work, you are technically in breach of that employment contract. And what an employee could do is say, you've essentially fired me by altering this term or condition, and sue you for wrongful dismissal. Now, for anybody who's dealing with the court system right now or has followed anything, the courts are presently closed. They announced that they would be closed until June 1st. So I'm disinclined to think that a judge will be particularly sympathetic to somebody bringing up, bringing forward a claim of constructive dismissal in these circumstances. So I can't guarantee that, of course, and we have seen some employment counsel that are coming forward saying, bear in mind, if this isn't in your contract, there is a claim you can bring forward. So we might see something once we come out of this. I'll say it, lawyers are always looking for an opportunity to sue, so we might see some of that come through that way. But I think provided that you're communicating with your employees that the only reason you're doing this is directly arising from this COVID pandemic and that you have every intention of returning them to work once this is all said and done, I think that will certainly mitigate against any such claim. Now, in terms of the length of the layoff, and given we are in somewhat uncertain times, under the Employment Standards Act, that is 13 weeks. At the end of 13 weeks, it would be a deemed termination unless the employee otherwise agrees to stay on layoff. Now, that can be extended to 35 weeks in the event that you provide any kind of payment to the employees. And usually that's continuing benefit coverage. And I have had clients ask, what if our benefit coverage is such that the employee pays a portion of it? That's okay. The employee can still continue to pay their portion. So if it's a 50-50 cost share, you cover your 50%, they provide you with post-dated checks covering their 50%, and that allows that temporary layoff period to extend to 35 weeks. So that is out there. Again, I think it's just really, really important to make sure you're communicating. We come back to the communication piece with your employees on that. A little bit different in my unionized workforces, and for those of you who have unionized employees, you likely have collective agreements that provide for certain notice provisions. Typical is there'll be 4 weeks notice before any layoff is affected. Obviously, we're in very unusual circumstances right now because we just don't know what's happening and things seem to be changing by the day. What I'm recommending in that regard is to have a conversation with your union and say, look, these are the circumstances under which we're affecting the layoff. We are unfortunately unable to provide you with more notice than this, so sort of cut us some slack, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it. It is possible some unions will grieve if insufficient notice is given. Not quite sure where arbitrators are going to fall on this. There is no case law out there that governs how an employer ought to conduct themselves in a situation of a global pandemic. So we don't have any guidance there, but we would argue as legal counsel that these are extremely unusual circumstances, sort of the force majeure argument of outside of our control, and show us some mercy. Certainly if you are still continuing to operate and things look good, there's nothing wrong with advising the union, look, it's good now, but we're going to put you on notice. We might have to effect temporary layoffs down the road, and that way your notice is still there and you can always work out the details afterwards. Another big question that's come forward is work refusals. We do have some clients that have had employees refuse to work on the basis that they believe that the work is unsafe. And the circumstances have been varied. However, please note that if an employee engages in a work refusal under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, you still have to follow the exact same process you would have otherwise followed for any other work refusal. So it requires that you get your Health and Safety Committee together. It requires that you have that discussion and look at the work to determine whether or not it's a valid refusal. Where an agreement cannot be reached, the Ministry of Labor would need to be called. What I've been basically advising clients is, provided you're following those guidelines from the health unit, you should be fine. However, on the flip side, if we happen to be putting our employees at risk, I'd like the Ministry of Labor to let us know so that we can remedy that situation, because certainly nobody wants to put their employees in harm's way. Now, there's also some confusion about issuing records of employment and whether or not they still have to be issued in light of the new CERB that was announced. We are still recommending that you do so. Certainly no harm in filing a record of employment. There are a number of different codes to use. Where it's a shortage of work issue, you should be using code A. Where it's an issue of illness, including self-isolation or quarantine, you should be using code D. And where it's a leave of absence, you should be using code N. Please note, if an employee is unable to come to work because of childcare issues, because the schools are closed, and as Rakesh noted, are closed even longer now, that would be coded as a code N. That is a protected leave. The Employment Standards Act was amended, so what that means is the employee can go off from work without any kind of penalty, much like any other protected leave, including parental, for example. So when this is all over and you're bringing your employees back to work, the employee would then have to be returned to their position or a comparable position if their position no longer exists. We have had some clients call indicating we have employees simply refusing to work. Some of the conversations have been, look, my employees are telling me they're hearing the Prime Minister, and all the Prime Minister is telling them is, you should be staying home. Why would you make me come to work? Again, if you've been deemed essential and you're following all the health unit guidelines, you have every right to ask your employees to come to work. Of course, subject to any health considerations. Certainly, I wouldn't be insisting that somebody with, certain vulnerabilities, be they respiratory or whatnot, I wouldn't be insisting on them coming into work. But failing that, you are within your rights, and you should probably just seek legal before you affect this. But as a general rule, I can say you are within your rights to indicate to the employee that it's not valid for them not to come in. They don't have a reason not to be in. They're not sick. There's no shortage of work. They're not staying home to take care of a loved one or a child. They need to come into work, and failing which you're going to take the position that they've quit from their employment. And in that regard, you would issue a record of employment with code E, which reflects acquit. I'm going to flip it over to Allison to talk a little more about the records of employment.
Thanks, Nancy. So with regard to the ROEs, as Nancy said, you are obligated to provide those to employees. What they do with it off the back of that is their choice. And obviously you want to make sure that you tick all the boxes for doing your paperwork as an employer. Last week was quite a struggle for a lot of people trying to get those records of employment out. How you do that will depend on whether or not you're using a payroll system. So if you are using a payroll provider and you've authorized them previously to do ROEs on your behalf, so just note ROEs are through Service Canada versus the payroll providers, which the authorization is with CRA. So it is a separate authorization. If you have authorized them in the past to do it, you would be able to submit them through that. If you have not, then the alternative is to use the Service Canada portal. Just something to note, the Service Canada portal, needless to say, was never meant to deal with 1 million applications, which is what they received last week. It was meant to deal with about 27,000 a week. So we're talking a significant multiple. It was quite difficult to get into it last week. I can tell you that it's significantly improved in the last few days, and we have been able to submit ROEs on behalf of clients without a problem. They are being processed, but again, no, they have 1 million to process. And so I believe as of Friday, the government had said they'd worked through about 143,000 of those. And your employees may be able to actually start, if they choose to go down the EI route, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in a minute, they may actually be able to start applying through the Service Canada portal for EI in advance of their ROE actually being approved, so that once it is approved, those will be matched in the system. So Nancy's going to hop back on, and we're going to talk a little bit about, because there's been a lot of confusion between CERB, so the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, and EI. I wish that it was completely clear to all of us. It isn't exactly yet. The one thing to think about with CERB versus EI is it covers people that are not also, it would not generally be considered employees. So self-employed individuals, small business owners, people that file sole proprietorship returns, or people that would traditionally be considered subcontractors. If you fall in that category, you would definitely want to file under that program. The portal is not yet up for that program. The government is saying that they hope that it will be up on April 6th. I highlight the word hope, because until it actually happens, we don't know. So I would suggest to you that if you can apply for EI, that you do that in the interim. It may actually get to you quicker than the CERB payments will. And if you do that, then your information is in the system. Now, another thing to note is that the likelihood is that this program, the CERB program, will be administered through the CRA My Account. You can imagine CRA is used to dealing with every taxpayer that files their taxes. So those are generally already set up in their system. You just have to make sure that you have access to it online and that you've been able to update both your contact information and your direct deposit information. So I would recommend that while we're all waiting to see exactly how it plays out, that you go online and do take advantage of getting that set up. Nancy, did you want to speak about the difference between the two and what to think about?
I will. Thank you, Allison. And I should note, I believe, and Rakesh may highlight this after, I believe this is all being recorded because I recognize Allison and I are throwing a lot of information out there, so you can go back and view it. And Allison and I at the end of this will highlight some resources we have available as well, because it's a lot of information coming in very quickly. But just to hit on that point about EI and
Sorry, I just
oh, thank you, Rakesh.
No, it's true. It will be made available on our website.
Wonderful. Good. I'm glad I got that one right. Thank you, Rakesh. So one of the we are getting a lot of questions in terms of whether employees should be applying for CERB or EI. Now, as Allison just pointed out, the portal is not up. I think the Prime Minister, in every speech he's now giving, is repeating, we're hoping, we're hoping, we're hoping. Let's be real, no, but that's not a guarantee. So what we are continuing to tell our clients is encourage your employees to still file for EI. There's no harm in doing so, particularly employees who will end up making more money on EI than the CERB, because bear in mind the CERB is a $2,000 a month benefit. Anyone who has already applied for EI need not reapply when this portal kind of up and launches. They can just leave their application in the queue. We're suspecting, although we don't know, that they're going to flip everything over to this other portal because, as Allison pointed out, they were inundated with so many applications. I think they're just going to say, look, throw these in here and we'll process them through here. I should tell you as well, when you're filling out those ROEs, one thing that will help expedite that process is please do not insert any comments on your record of employment. The minute there are comments in that box, it gets yanked and it requires a manual review. So just stick with those codes we mentioned earlier, have your employees file, get themselves in the queue on EI, and then ultimately they may get bumped over for that CERB benefit once that portal is up and running. And for those individuals, and I have had people reach out to Allison's point again, just to highlight that, say, you know what, I'm a sole proprietor, I'm a sole practitioner, it's just me here, I can't access EI benefits, can I do something here? Yes, this will be the avenue through which they can secure some additional benefits. So I just wanted to make sure we highlighted that. Allison? Thanks,
Nancy. Yeah, and just in terms of the numbers around CERB, and I'm going to refer to this so I read it properly. Basically, CERB is $2,000 monthly. It's that flat amount that the government is offering. If you compare that to EI benefits, so EI basic calculation is 55% of your former income, that would cap out at a salary of $54,200. So as Nancy said, depending on where you fall, one may be preferential to the other. Having said that, there's a limited time under which you can apply for EI. And so we would recommend that if you are eligible, as we're sitting and waiting for CERB to be activated and applications to be accepted, we would recommend that you do go forward with the EI. So layering onto that and thinking of the actual employee, I'm just going to go through a few supports for individuals. Obviously, one of the biggest things coming out of the last week is the 75% wage subsidy. And for the moment, I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of the individual, and then I'll move on to the business perspective. But, you know, the government's hope is that they want to keep everyone in their jobs, not only from a financial perspective, but also from a mental perspective. It's hard to lose your job. And so repeatedly, the Prime Minister is saying, you know, if you can, please rehire your workers. So if you have been laid off, I would say give your employer a few days until the announcement comes out as to how the 75% wage subsidy is going to be rolled out, and give them some time to digest that and figure out what they're going to do. But it's worth asking the question, right? Can I be rehired? And take advantage of that scheme. In terms of actual things that you can access from a personal perspective is, again, sign up for CRA My Account, very, very, very key. And then you can, if you're required to pay personal tax installments in the next few months, you can defer those. So deferral until September 1st for any installments that are due, you know, in the March, April, May, June timeframe. And so that buys people some time. In addition, personal tax returns are now not due until June 1st. So anybody that was prepping to file their April 30th tax return, it's not due till June 1st. Having said that, we would recommend that if you think you qualify for the enhanced GST, HST payments available from the government, or the Canadian Child Tax Benefit, so the amounts that that they're adding for children, we would recommend that you get your return processed faster, because the guess is that it will be based on 2019 tax returns. But even if they are processed, you do have until September 1st to pay. So now, government support for small business or for any business is obviously top on a lot of people's minds. And, you know, the intention of the government is to make sure, as Nancy pointed out, that there's a business to go back to. And they're trying to do whatever they can to support businesses to, in turn, support their employees. So for all small businesses out there, I know some of you are maybe a bit concerned that you don't have a perfect record with CRA. Not having a perfect record with CRA in terms of remitting or filing or paying doesn't preclude you from any of these programs. That has not, there's been no indication of that whatsoever. They're not going to hold that against you. And to boot, any audits are basically on hold, audits and collections. So if you do receive a notice, often they're automated. They have specific programs that run, whether it's, you know, specific payroll things that the system's looking at, you can ignore those for the moment. Although the system's still generating collection notices and audit notices, they are not happening for the foreseeable future. So until last week there was originally the announcement of the 10% wage subsidy, and that was going to be administered by allowing business owners to reduce the actual amount of payroll remittance they paid. So as opposed to the government actually handing out cash, they were essentially going to take less cash back from businesses to allow them to, in turn, have some cash within their business. That basically, as Nancy said, got ripped up. And so, you know, we do have to be careful. We're talking about things that haven't been legislated yet. But at this point, what stands is the 75% wage subsidy. Now, the intention of that is to allow you to hire back your employees if you've laid them off, or to keep them employed. You are not required to pay the additional 25%. So the government will subsidize wages, but there are some caveats around that. So it requires that you've had a 30% drop in your revenue. We're not exactly sure how the government's going to quantify that and what is going to need to be submitted and how it's going to need to be submitted to qualify. We're waiting for some insight from Minister Morneau on that. But at the moment, there is a requirement that you have a 30% reduction in your revenue to qualify for it, full stop. Unfortunately, that knocks startups out right off the hop. So many startups are pre-revenue. Obviously, if you can't show that you've had a 30% reduction in revenue because you've had no revenue, you will not be able to access this program. Now, from all of the conversations that have been happening and all of the presentations from all of the government officials, the Prime Minister included, needless to say, they're very, very much trying to backstop the economy and make sure that we do have a functioning economy when we come out of this. So I wouldn't be surprised if something comes out for that segment of the population in due course. My guess is that they're trying to support, you know, functioning business to start and healthcare, and they're going to work their way through that in due course. The other thought is that the government may feel that because you're pre-revenue, you've already had alternative financing in place to get you to where you need to be. So the jury's out on that one. So in terms of the 75% wage subsidy, the government's going to pay up to a maximum of $847 a week. So that equates to 75% of a $58,000 full-time salary. And with that, again, the employer is not required to contribute the additional 25%, although the government is encouraging you to do it. You do need to apply. It's not automatic. We're not sure yet how the funds are going to flow. If I had to guess, I would assume that it's going to come through Revenue Canada in some way, shape, or form, as most business owners are registered online and do have direct deposit information lodged with Revenue Canada, especially if they're filing GST, HST returns on a regular basis. So sit tight, keep your eyes and ears peeled for the information on that. Both Nancy and I have blogs on our websites that are being updated on an almost daily basis. So as soon as the criteria for the 30% drop in revenue and the way to apply is announced, we will post that. If you cannot apply for the wage subsidy and you can't keep your employees on, then you will have to go through the route of laying them off and filing ROEs. And if you have contractors, they're not eligible for the wage subsidy. And again, we go back to the CERB. Nancy, did you want to add any comments to that before I move on to other financing?
I just wanted to also note, in addition to all these things, there are certain measures that are already part of our system that have not changed. So for example, there's still the option of doing a work share program. Now, we were sort of expecting the government to advise that the 30-day waiting period on that would be waived. Unfortunately, they haven't done that yet. Again, stay tuned, that could change. But that is an option that's still available. I know we're all hoping in 30 days this is all over, but just to bear that in the back of your minds. And there's also the option of going through with a supplementary unemployment benefit plan for, you know, and I've had some clients say, look, I can't keep my entire workforce occupied. Should I split everything up between a greater number of people, or should I lay some people off and keep whatever complement I can? And those really are individual business decisions. However, I have had some clients that have been able, well, let me say this much, have offered to some of their employees, if you don't want to be here because you're not comfortable, you can go, which they've elected to do, making the decision a little bit easier. And then for those that they've kept on, they've been able to provide a bit of a top-up, because for some, that 55% or the $2,000 isn't really covering anywhere near what they were making before. And I know we have some clients that are worried about keeping some of their employees when this is all said and done as well. So those are just, I know I'm talking about spending money when I talk about the supplementary unemployment benefit, but just things to bear in mind that are there to make sure you're reinforcing your employees, rewarding your employees, and trying to keep as many of them employed as you can. I have had a couple of employers as well ask, can I reduce the number of hours my employees just work generally and pay them a little bit less? Again, you're risking a potential constructive dismissal, but given the alternative, most employees have been quite cooperative in that, and so they are entering into agreements with their employees. Say, look, instead of working an 8-hour day, I'm going to work a 6-hour day, and I'm going to take home less money. So there are very creative ways, and I do encourage you to reach out to your legal counsel to talk about what some of those might look like, but it doesn't have to be a 100% or a 0%. I think what we're hearing from the government is try and keep people as employed as you can, and I know Allison's going to cover a couple other options business owners have, so maybe using that money to continue to do that could be helpful. Just wanted to throw those thoughts in there.
Nancy, can you just speak to the supplementary EI too? Because we have talked to clients about that, but you do have to have documentation in place to allow that to exist, and it does take time to process.
It does, and what we were encouraged, we've had a couple of clients do it, and I was quite impressed. Now this might have changed because this was a week and a half ago. They processed it relatively quickly. The client even said, I heard from somebody in 24 hours. Now again, that might have changed because everything changes on a daily basis, but we have had some success on that. And I'm hopeful that if employers are doing things to try and better their employees' lives, and it happens to be, you know, we weren't approved in time or whatnot, that the government's not going to turn around and claw that money back, because I think the goal here really is to keep people gainfully employed. And if I can keep someone employed and pay them a top up of X% or give them something or keep them on my payroll, I'd rather that than lose them to somebody else.
Yeah, and I do. Sorry, Rakesh.
Go ahead, Alice.
I was just going to say, I do see a question too around whether sole proprietors, whether the 75% wage subsidy does apply. And my understanding is that at the moment, until we have the actual how you apply, it applies to anyone that runs payroll through the government. Now, it would not necessarily apply to the owner of that sole proprietorship. They would fall under CERB.
Sorry, and I see there was another question there too, Allison, saying, I know 2 on-call staff who have been called in regularly but are not getting any hours now. The employer is refusing to issue an ROE. If they are refusing, which an employer should not be doing that, but let's assume for a moment they are doing this despite being requested to provide one, it's not really clear what the CERB portal is going to look like, and it may be that they can go on that portal in any event once it's launched, hopefully next week, and apply. I would encourage them to do that with or without the ROE, because an employer should not be playing games like that at this time.
Agreed. Sorry, Rakesh, do you have another?
Yeah, there's one more question, and this got to do with someone that was stopped by Windsor police on their way to work. And the question is, should the employers be issuing a letter that states that, you know, that this employee works in a company that provides essential service, so that, you know, they are not, they're not stopped? Is it something that you've seen, or what do you suggest?
No, Rakesh, I don't think that that's necessary. We have had some clients call and ask that because employees have brought that forward. I think this might be coming from countries where there is a full lockdown and the police are stopping people in the streets asking where they're going. We're not in such a lockdown at this time. That could change if things go sideways, but at this point in time, I haven't heard of anyone actually being stopped by the police. I think it's sufficient for employees to still report to work, and if that changes, certainly that would be something that we would definitely communicate out to say, look, make sure employees have this so that there's no issue.
Yeah, and I thought so too as well, because we're not in complete lockdown. But
No.
it seems that in this particular instance, the police did stop to ask the employee as to where that person is going. So that's a little strange, actually. So anyway, we will find out. I'll make sure that we relay this over to the mayor and to the police department to see what their thoughts are, or if they have any suggestions.
Sure.
So from a business perspective, Rakesh, there's also alternative ways for businesses to be able to actually access money. So simple way, obviously the simplest is to call your bank if you actually have loans with them already. All of the big banks and the local banks, I have spoken to them personally, are doing their very best to support businesses through this and to defer payments. So usually what that means is the amortization period of your loan will be extended. And in some cases, you do require to still cover the interest, but it does give you that buffer if you really do need the additional cash flow. And then in addition, last week, there was an announcement for BDC offering up to $100,000 for businesses. You can apply for that through the BDC portal, similar to Service Canada. I did speak to BDC last week, and they received 10 times, I think it was even more than 10 times the number of applications that they normally do. So bear with them as they process through those. I have had people get responses back already. The BDC loan does require you to still be credit worthy. You don't want to be taking on additional financing within your business that is going to cripple it as well. So, and you do have to have been in operations for 24 months to qualify for the BDC program. It's about 3 weeks-ish to get funding, or it was. I would assume that might be a little bit more delayed given the circumstances. In addition to that, obviously this last week, the government has announced the Canada Emergency Business Account. We're still waiting again for how that's going to be administered and how you actually apply. That is a $40,000, up to a $40,000 government-backed loan, interest-free for 12 months. It is not a grant, so you will have to pay it back, but they do forego the interest for 12 months. And it's only available for organizations that have had payroll between $50,000 and $1 million in 2019. So you do have to have been paying people. Again, similar to what Nancy said, what we've been talking about all the way through the piece, the goal of the government is to make sure that people stay gainfully employed from both a financial perspective and a mental perspective. So a lot of the criteria around these programs relates to you having employees on staff, on payroll. And they're also saying that up to $10,000 of that loan may be forgiven. Again, no idea on the criteria of how they're going to determine whether or not they forgive that $10,000. And hopefully there'll be some more information forthcoming on that this week. In addition, there's also deferrals. I think we talked about deferrals on your loan. So call your bank, get a deferral on your loan, simplest way. And then from the government perspective, deferral on corporate tax. So many of you would have had to pay corporate tax in the next few months. And that has all been deferred until September 1st. And in addition, last week, the government has also deferred payment of HST and duty that is due either March, April, or May. And that has now been deferred to June 30th, which is fantastic because a lot of sole proprietorships who obviously all have a December 31st year end were having HST that was due actually today. I would suggest that you still file all of those returns. There's been no comment about delay in timelines for filing, but you can delay the payments to those. And then of course, there's also the option to defer some municipal taxes. I don't know, Rakesh, if you want to speak to that briefly.
Yeah, So, the municipal portion has been deferred for 90 days, and so has the provincial portion of the property taxes. So, as most of people know, there's two portions or two components to property tax: the municipal portion and the one that goes to the school and education board. So, both of them have been deferred, at least here in Windsor, in the city of Windsor, for 90 days. In the county, the deferral is between 30 to 60 days. That is dependent on which municipality you are in. So please check with your municipality. It is between 30 and 60 days in the county, and in City of Windsor, it is 90 days.
Perfect. And I do see a question somebody asked with regard to the 40K government-backed loan. Do we know what the criteria is? Unfortunately, we do not. And then in addition, they said, is it the same criteria as applying for a business loan with your bank? My guess is no. So as I mentioned, the BDC, it's similar to going through a normal loan assessment with any of the banks. It does require you to provide financial statements, and you have to have been in operations for 24 months. My guess is that the requirements around the 40,000 are going to be different than that to allow businesses that maybe can't access the BDC, EDC programs to be able to access some other financing. But it remains to be seen until the government comes out with the actual application process. So, first step, if you're a business owner, decide if you actually qualify for the wage subsidy. Have you had a 30% drop in revenue? Again, we have to figure out how we actually prove that. And that's a great place to start. I would say if you can take advantage of that, absolutely do, even if your employees aren't working. The intention of that is to keep people employed, whether or not they're actually bum in seat doing what they're supposed to be doing. Other people have asked about rent. There is no standard for forgiving or deferring rent at the moment, but we have heard from clients that landlords are working with them on an individual basis to help provide some cash flow relief, especially for our restaurant and retail clients. So I would say, it can't hurt but have the conversation, but it is on an individual basis. Nancy, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm just going to, our corporate guys here at the firm have been dealing with this quite a bit, and I want to commend a number of the landlords in the city. So for anybody paying rent, they have been wonderful for the most part. We've seen things such as deferrals of payments, and then whether they're added on down in further months, in the form of extended leases or increased payments when things resume, because again, we're all going to get through this. But the thing not to do is to tell your landlord you're not paying. I mean, at the end of the day, they want to see you survive as well. It would be a breach of contract if you just stop paying, with all kinds of other consequences I'm not going to speak to because it's outside my area of expertise. But certainly we have seen a lot of our corporate landlords have been quite wonderful about working with their tenants because they want you to stay at the end of the day. So I would certainly have that discussion, see what they can do with you, and I truly believe that working together a solution can be found.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We've heard the same thing. So have that conversation, make sure you reach out to them. We're all in this together. Everyone's in the same boat, and people are very open to conversations. Obviously, if you've got subcontractors for them and, it's a big impact on them, talk to them about CERB, recommend that they have their My Account up to date with CRA. And with employees, make sure you do your due diligence and give them their ROE if that's the road you go down. With all of this, we want to make sure that you keep your records. So just because we're in a pandemic situation and we've never been through it before, doesn't mean that you don't have the supporting documentation to actually prove that what you're saying is true when the dust settles and Canada Revenue or the government comes to you to actually audit what happened. So keep those records, whether they're electronic, whether they're paper. Make sure that you can back up your payroll, make sure that you can back up your ROEs, make sure that when the criteria comes down that you can prove the 30% reduction in revenue, whatever that looks like. Continue to file your HST returns. Don't panic that you might not be able to pay them. We suggest that you continue to file them and file them on time, and just defer those payments. So it's going to make it so much easier for you when things get back up and running, because you won't have this massive backlog of paperwork to deal with, and you don't have to worry about any tax audits, collections during this time. Just in terms of managing your cash flow, obviously the simplest thing is to sit down, whether it's with your accountant, or just on a piece of paper yourself, and lay out what money is still coming in. Do I have anything? Can I get creative? We're seeing really, really phenomenal things happen with clients sort of reinventing, especially in restaurant and retail, how they're running their business. People that never offered delivery before are now offering that. People that that didn't offer a service are now offering it. So get creative. It's amazing to see people working together through this. And then think about how your costs are going to change, because obviously without being out and about and without operations working the same, yes, your revenue is decreasing, but your costs are also going to change. Do you have bills outstanding that you can defer paying? Talk to your suppliers. People are, if they're able, are understanding, and ask if you can be put on a payment plan, or if you can defer anything. And then obviously with respect to any of the tax amounts that you owe, barring payroll remittance. Payroll remittance is the one I would suggest that you keep paying. There's been no recommendation that should be deferred at this point. But HST, corporate tax, personal tax payments, you can defer those. And then look at what credit facilities you have access to, starting with those government programs and working through the alternative financing that's available as discussed. So I think we're almost at time. We maybe have a couple minutes for questions if there are any additional questions.
Yes, Alison. I've got a couple of questions from chat, but also from our members who've emailed us or contacted us earlier. And one of them has got to do with what if the employee is laid off, but then the employer needs to bring them back for a few hours or a day in a week so that they can carry out some business activity. And if that company is providing essential services with truncated hours or partial hours of operation in a week, can they bring back that employee?
There is a minimum. Nancy, you can probably speak to this better than I can, but there is a minimum that people can work and still be considered laid off, yes?
Yeah, there is, and I don't know it off the top of my head, but yes. And it's no different than any sort of EI approved leave, so parental. So there's a certain amount of hours somebody can work. The only consequence is if they exceed that allowance, they can still work. It just gets clawed off of the EI they're paid. So there's nothing wrong with bringing somebody back in to support. You can pay them the amount. It just might affect the EI entitlement, but certainly don't have your business be negatively impacted by not bringing somebody back who can do the work, because it will probably do you better in the long run.
I agree.
Thank you. And this is, for landlords that have multi-units or you have multiple properties, and they're having challenges as the tenants may, decide to not pay or defer the payment. What is the recourse there for those landlords? One, in terms of dealing with the tenants, and second, mortgage. The banks, lending organizations have decided to work with landlords, especially when it comes to residential homeowners and individual property owners. But do they offer similar benefit to landlords that have multiple properties and are asking for waiver on mortgage payments?
So the banks are dealing with the requests on an individual basis. And from all of the bankers that I spoke to last week, that they're asking individual businesses to call their bankers directly. So it remains to be seen whether or not your landlord is able to access the deferral of payments, and whether or not they even have a mortgage on the building. That's on such a case-by-case basis. I couldn't really speak to that. I know that that's a big concern for a lot of people. They're feeling that landlords really have it good and they're getting this deferral and they're not really passing that on. But you have to remember that there are a lot more costs just other than just mortgage and property taxes that go into a building, and landlords recoup that over quite a long time in terms of the maintenance and repairs, et cetera, et cetera. So again, as Nancy and I said, I would suggest that you know, if you're struggling to make rent, and you have that conversation with your landlord.
And certainly if you're a landlord and you have people defaulting, you really should seek legal advice, because there is recourse there. Not that we want to go through the litigious route, but landlords have rights as well, and these are legal agreements that are entered into in their leases, so it would be good to seek advice in that regard.
Thank you. And for startups, you know, what is out there? Because, you know, most of the programs we've heard, you know, including the access to capital is for companies that have been in existence for some time, for 2 years. What about, you know, those that are early stage companies? And I know, Allison, you mentioned about the programs not being relevant, but is there something that's coming up, or is there, you know, some efforts that are in place? You know, clearly, you know, we at the Chamber would be bringing this up with the federal government, but do you know of anything that's happening to support early stage companies?
I don't at the moment, Rakesh. I know, unfortunately, you know, with the BDC loans, they definitely wouldn't qualify because they need 2 years of operations. And in terms of the $40,000, it seems to be based on payroll. So I suppose if they had payroll in the early stage, again, it remains to be seen based on what the final criteria are when that comes out. But it's possible if they've had payroll in startup, they may qualify. Other than that, I would point them in the direction of the traditional agencies that deal with those. So whether it's WERCC or the Small Business Center, the Epicenter that administer the programs for startups, to look to those sources, because that's often where the funds are funneled through for those startup companies.
Okay, thank you. There's one question from Wendy Parson. I'm not sure if I understand this right. So company waited for the government to be closed, and they were told by labor lawyers that anyone who does not bring back employees by June 15th, they will be considered to be terminated. Anyone in business who isn't finished will be.
I don't know if this hits on the temporary layoff provisions and the number of weeks. As I indicated earlier, there's a 13-week proviso in which you can temporarily lay somebody off under the Employment Standards Act. Beyond that, you must continue some sort of payment, whether it's a supplementary unemployment benefit top-up or whether it's benefits or whatnot, failing which, yes, they are deemed terminated. I'm not sure what they were told by labor lawyers, but that's all I can think of.
But, I mean, Nancy, you can agree or disagree with me. I think the intention of the government here is to make sure that people have jobs to go back to. So I would suggest that as this plays out, we're going to see things come into play that aren't being discussed at the moment just because we're in week 2.
Yeah, and I also think, I mean, the sense I'm getting is more people are concerned about their employers remaining in business than anything else. So I'm not hearing of many employees who are throwing up their hands and looking to allege deemed terminations. I'm hearing, what can we do to help, and how do we get back, because we want to have a place to go back to. So the messaging I'm getting is more the opposite. And I think what people want to see happen is they want to see their employers work through this, come out of it, and call them back to work. And I'm hopeful that that is the direction most employers will head in, and that very few employees will be looking to allege that they've been deemed terminated because they're going to want to go back to the place that they work at.
Look, and you're even seeing, I mean, we're seeing CEOs basically forego their salary to be able to pay staff. I've had multiple clients that are business owners call me and say, you know, I can take the hit. If I take nothing and I, you know, spread that across my staff, it won't, you know, it maybe will cover a couple of people. What if I talk to my staff and we figure out just a reduced amount? This was prior to the 75%, but we were having conversations like, what if my staff agrees to just all take a lower wage and in cash during this time, and we basically bank the money for later when we can pay it. And so people really, really do want to do right by their employees. I find that people that have gone in to build their own business, they feel like they're their kids. They want to take care of them, and everybody's just trying to do their best.
And on top of that, the other thing we've had clients do is offer their employees the option of taking vacation before they go off. Given we don't know how long this is going to go on, and it could be 2 more weeks and then we're ramping back up, people have elected to use vacation time and say, okay, let's see how this plays out, not got on the system and been available that way as well. So it really does require, I've seen more creativity come out of this, more of a cooperative effort than I've ever seen, because we're all in it together. And as Allison said, some real great stories have come out of all of this. And I think as long as, again, we're back to the original communication piece, if we're communicating, I think we can work through anything.
Well said there, Nancy. There is a lot of collaboration, a lot of good effort that's coming out. It's everywhere, whether you are talking of companies that are coming up with a product that they've never made before, venturing into, completely different sectors, making use of their technology, their resources, human resources to come up with innovative products. There's so much that's going on. So there's a lot of good work that's happening. Locally as well, there's a lot of good stories, a lot of good companies, whether it's manufacturing companies or whether it is Hiram Walker or whether it's services company. There's so many that are even offering the products and services for free or at highly discounted rate. So there is tremendous amount of good work and community spirit that we are seeing here. And there is also a great task force. The Economic Development Corporation, in partnership with several organizations, is having a local task force. There are several committees. And the Chamber of Commerce is chairing one of the committees. So we are looking at seeking support, information, cooperation, collaboration from everyone in this region. So you're right, we're in it together. We'll come up with solution together. So, if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, or you need some help, please feel free to reach us, at info@windsor-essex-chamber.org. You can send us your suggestions. And if you have further questions, maybe for Nancy or Allison, again, please feel free to send it to us, so we'll send it over to them. I thank you, Nancy and Allison, for volunteering your time. I know it's very busy time for all of us, especially for both of you. So we do thank you sincerely for making time for this. And to everyone that is here today joining us on this webinar, hope this was informative, hope this answered some of your questions. Again, if you need some more information, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Tomorrow, same time, we'll be also bringing in Brian Massey and Lisa Gretzky, and you can ask further questions that have not been answered as yet, or if you need more information from Brian and from Lisa, you can ask that as well. You can also send your question to us before the webinar so that we have it prepped and ready for them to answer. So thank you again to everyone, and wish you a very pleasant day ahead.
Thank you for having me.